Welcome to Analyzing Finance with Nick. This video is a special debate about universal basic income. Because of the topic's complexity and that I wanted to present both sides despite having a fairly strong bias on one side of this issue, I decided to help arrange a debate where I picked a local political candidate and an activist on the other side of the aisle to have a debate about this topic, to present both sides and let you draw your own conclusions. Due to the nature of the format of the debate, I was not really able to express my full argument and put in all the full numbers and data in the way I would like to. So I created a separate video that I released previously where I go into my full argument against basic income and the primary reasons why I just do not think it's a viable solution to technological unemployment. I will also be releasing excerpts of the debate that didn't make the final cut for this video in a bonus video for members that are upcoming. So if you want to check out that segment, I recommend becoming a member of the channel in the bonus video tier. And with that, we'll get started.
Well, my own dining room table, actually, had a dinner party a few weeks back. I had about 20 or so people over, and these two guys started having a very respectful discourse. It was actually respectful, it was shocking. And it was pleasant. And the other guests at the party actually said, hey, these guys should perform at the salon. They should debate in a respectful and polite manner. It was very pleasant. It was shocking. It's very un-Orange County. May I produce tonight, this evening, Nicholas Pardini.
Woo! Woo! Nick.
He is our proverbial mascot. He is an economist. He's well followed on social media. A good friend of mine. We've traveled together a bit. He's traveling the world as a globetrotter and a young economist.
Nice.
And always delightful with very deep family roots in Orange County. Miles Patricola. What's the debate topic?
So me and Nick are going to be talking about UBI, which is Universal Basic Income, in the context of AI, automation, and the replacement of the workforce in the coming years.
Pardini, anything you want to add there?
We're just going to have a thoughtful debate. Miles is going to argue the pro position for universal basic income, and I'm going to argue the position against it.
And for that this evening, we begin the Saturday Salon formal debate about universal basic income. The floor belongs to Miles for the first 3 minutes, and if you guys wish to have open debate or back and forth, which would you guys
Basically,
do?
we're going to start with 3 minutes on each side, then have open debate for another 10 minutes, and then open up to questions.
As far as UBI and technology and why I think UBI would be a fantastic thing to consider as we're evolving in our society and heading towards a more technological age where we're going to have a lot of workers, especially in the near future, the white-collar workers, be replaced by AI that can do their jobs much quicker for much less money than a traditional worker would cost the company. And I think that UBI is a really interesting concept on its own that has been tested in a number of different ways. In Alaska, since 1976, they've had a similar form of UBI, and I'd be happy to talk more about that with Nick. I actually didn't have like a full opening statement prepared. They just told me I was going to give one. I'm going to keep it limited, and I think we'll just talk about things as they develop. I'll give it over to Nick.
I'm going to take a position against UBI. I know AI is a risk to employment, and there is a lot of technological developments, but there's two main counterpoints I have here. Well, first counterpoint is that I think there will still be things to do in the future, even in the world of increased technological unemployment. Like, I think that the pace of robots and AI is going to be substantial for job replacement, but it's not going to happen fast enough, especially with populations declining due to generations of low birth rates and an aging workforce, to completely replace all of the demand. But the main issue, which is my main counter-argument really for UBI, is that there's just 5 structural problems with the whole concept of itself which fail to have it to work. The first one is that UBI disincentivizes work. For any study done at scale, Alaska is not the best example because it's only about $2,000 to $3,000 per year. Nobody's going to be living off of that. I'm talking about experience of 1,000 USD a month or more, or that equivalent percentage of income in less developed countries. It has resulted in some decline in working hours among those who take it. The second is that UBI is inflationary. When you have less people working and producing stuff, but the same if not more demand to buy things, that results in price increases, and that could compound on itself. The third one is UBI fails to solve the distribution and meaning problems. If you just paid everybody not to work, what is going to be the purpose for a lot of people's lives? What's the source of meaning? And then on top of that, who gets to live in Newport Beach? Who gets to live in the nicer parts of America if 90% of the population is on UBI? How do we distribute who gets what in society and who does not? Is it just a matter of birth, of managing to get your bag before the robots came and replaced all the jobs? The fourth one is voting for your salary compromises democracy. Basically, if you have universal basic income, you're essentially giving people the right to vote for their paycheck. And when you do that, people might have the wrong incentives to vote for the wrong kind of policies, even if they're unhealthy for the country in the long run. And then the fifth one is the math really just doesn't math. If you wanted to pay for this universal basic income, the most limited one and the most generous assumptions on how low it would cost, it would create a major fiscal problem and require taxes to be raised to levels that I don't think are palatable for most societies. I'll go into more details in the further conversation, but that concludes my opening statement.
Miles. All right.
So I'm really happy with the points that you brought up because I think that's a good structure for our conversation to go in. And just going at them like one by one, I'm not going to get it in order. But you were talking about how the incentive to work is going to be influenced by UBI. Right?
Yes.
Do you think that people are going to be relying exclusively on their UBI to live and not worry about any other form of income?
It depends on the size of the UBI proposal. Like, I don't really consider it UBI unless it actually can replace. Like, the whole idea of a universal basic income is that it's enough that you can live without having a job.
See, I see it a little differently there because I see UBI as a social safety net, not a handout to give people to incentivize them to be lazy. For the people who need assistance from the government, which we have a lot of programs for already, I think you'll agree that it's not bad for the government to help people who need help, right?
It depends on how they do it and make sure the incentives are structured correctly, but that's a whole nother debate.
Okay, but I think it's part of the conversation we're having because UBI would be a government program that where you'd be adding to the list of other government programs that are designed to help people in society who need help through no fault of their own, right? Because some people might be lazy, as you said.
But the universal part means it goes to everybody.
One of the things that I would modify there is I don't know why Elon Musk would need UBI. So I'm fine with giving the people who need UBI assistance, but for the people who are ultra rich and an extra $1,000 in their pocket a month makes no difference.
The whole point of it being a social safety net, it needs to be big enough of a safety net that you won't be falling into debt or homeless if you're solely on it. That's why I think that if it's less than 2,000 USD per month, I don't really think it qualifies as a universal basic income. It's just kind of like a bonus payment. And there are countries that have tried this. The most recent one is Italy's citizens dividend, which they gave about 600 to 850 euro, and that's not as much as in America, but the cost of living is significantly lower in Italy, to the bottom 10 to 15% of Italians who qualified for it. And it ended up only lasting for 5 years before the current government abolished it because there was evidence that it did lead to some disincentives to work. There was incentives for people to work under the table and take money on the side.
I interrupt you there because I admit the Italy thing, sure, that didn't work, but we're talking about UBI in the context of the technological revolution as well, and like that wasn't part of the Italy example there. So if we are going into a new age where AI and automation are replacing a lot of workers, not just white collar workers, but labor as well, and we're heading closer towards a society of abundance where everyone has access to whatever they need, food, housing, water, and they don't have any job to earn the income they would need to spend on those things, it seems like our basic economic business model just doesn't work in that new era.
They have some valid points. It just really depends on the speed of it, for one, and two, will there be new roles to be created? Like, for example, there's a whole bunch of new industries, not just in software and tech. The fitness industry is a good example of it. 30 years ago, there wasn't really a fitness industry. Now that people have more wealth and free time, new industries will develop, and there's other ways that we can fix the employment problem without resorting to universal basic income. Because I don't think we're going to zero jobs. I think the worst case scenario, we lose 50 to 60% of the jobs in the economy.
That's huge.
That's the absolute.
So,
That's the worst case scenario.
All right, let's go with a smaller version of the worst. Let's
Yeah.
say 25%.
Yeah.
That's fair, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Still a lot of jobs.
Still a lot of jobs. Do you think that there is a better solution than UBI that would help in that 25% apocalypse scenario?
I think with the age of abundance, it should be used to increase the supply of goods and services so that the amount of income you need to make is lower than in the past.
So the dollar would be worth more.
Yeah, normally without government interference in a free market, you generally have deflation. Like the most least regulated industries, particularly in the technology sector, you see prices fall. Whereas in the most heavily regulated industries, you generally have prices increase or the market has a hard time maintaining demand. We agree that healthcare is hard to have a fully free competition because if somebody gets sick, they can't decide between 20 doctors who are going to give them the lowest quote because it's an emergency.
Right, yeah.
And so what we need to do, though, generally, is have a society, and I think housing is the best market that you can do this through the combination of deregulation, allowing increased density in certain places, allowing more construction overall, or reducing immigration so there isn't an excess demand strain on our housing. You bring the housing costs down, that's 40% of the average consumer's budget. That can, people don't have to work as much, which means you could have less jobs per family, for example, or you can have a 5-day business week with a 4-day work week and increase the amount of jobs for the same amount of work by 20%.
And it's on point of what you guys are currently talking about because, to your point, Miles, I would love to know in terms of the checks and balances that you would put in place as someone that was born and raised in Detroit and has seen like the food stamp system, for example, be grossly abused. As in, I have stood behind people in line and watched them pay $100 to get $80 in cash back with someone taking a cut. I would like to know how, in your mind, this system would have checks and balances to work.
Sure, great question, thank you. So the politicization of UBI, I think, needs to be like what we focus on if we ever do implement it, because a system similar to what we have with the Federal Reserve would be a better system that wouldn't be controlled by politicians. Nick was talking about earlier that people would be voting for their salaries. It's a new idea, so it hasn't been implemented. Like, none of this is being voted on in the House. It's probably not going to be for a long time. But hypothetically speaking, like, you're asking me for what my best case scenario would be, right? I would envision a system that would be apolitical, that wouldn't be at the disposal of any political party to manipulate for their own personal benefit, for their political aspiration. Of those systems and other ones in our government are complicated. There are a lot of loopholes. There are a lot of cracks that people fall through. And I think that a standard UBI system would help replace a lot of those systems that have too much bureaucracy.
Or replacing the existing welfare infrastructure with basic income.
I think that there's a lot of overlap that could be made up for with the UBI system, and that would also help with the whole taxes issue. If we were paying for both, that would be a little bit too much on taxes, but if you consolidate a system like that with UBI, that could be functional.
I did the numbers on this for both sides, just for perspective here. I wrote it down because I wasn't going to be able to memorize it.
Sure.
There's two ways you can do it. There is the net cost, which you're proposing, just giving $2,000 a month to the bottom 50% of the population.
Well, the 2,000 is negotiable.
Okay. That's like if you decide you're eliminating all the other welfare states. There are three ways
Not all of them.
Well, I'm trying to give you the most cost-effective solution here. because that's the most cost-effective way to do this. You restrict to the bottom half of income earners and get rid of all the other federal welfare.
I'd put it a little bit lower than half, but
There's 3 ways you'd be able to pay for this, and I think they're all still too high. One way is you'd have to have a VAT
okay.
of 8 to 13% federal on top of
Do you wanna
existing.
tell me what a VAT is?
A VAT is a value-added tax. It's the idea that it's kind of like a sales tax, but it goes on every stage of the value chain. They're very common in Europe. They range anywhere from 8% on the lower end, like in Switzerland, to like in the 20s on the higher end, like in France and Italy. The VAT, because of all the compounding, tends to be a higher net revenue generator than an ordinary sales tax would be. If you wanted a UBI in America, you would need about 8 to 13% VAT, depending on how much consumption would decline and how this would impact inflation, how it would affect GDP. If there was no impact and it was able just to be instituted, you could probably get away as low as like an 8% VAT.
Did you factor in if we added more to the corporate income tax, like something more like that? Because the corporate income tax,
The corporate
is
tax doesn't
extremely
really,
low right
it
now.
doesn't really move a drop in the bucket, really, in the big picture of
You don't
things.
think
Because
so?
the corporate, if you don't taxing, that money is taxed eventually by individuals or the dividend who receive it, or when you sell your stock capital gains. That's generally why every country in the world has basically lowered their corporate tax, because it's essentially a double taxation, and that money is eventually taxed at some point.
I spent 10 years in Australia. In Australia, they have a very social, democratic safety net, which seems along the same lines of what we're all debating here. If you don't have a job, you automatically get government housing. Boom, free, paid for. You get housing, you don't pay a cent. You have a house covered completely if you don't have a job.
What's your question?
Right? The next part of
That's
that,
not how it works.
if you want more
That's
money,
not how it works.
if you want more, they will pay you an extra $600 per week to go to university. And I've got friends that have got law degrees by doing that. And then they've now been able to transition from the safety net to succeed in the private sector. So pose that situation to both of you as a question, as a scenario, as an observation, and how do you respond to that?
Miles, you first.
I think the basic disagreement that we have on UBI and social assistance programs, like the one that sounds similar in Australia, is that I see them as a springboard for opportunities that allows people to have the flexibility and breathing room they might need to pursue some of these other industries or career options, which I think would be helpful if their job has been replaced by a robot and they need some form of income to fill the gap while they're looking for a new career potentially. And I think that I see it as a springboard. And I think that because Nick thinks there's going to be, and tell me if I'm wrong, that there's going to be some laziness, that there is going to be more of a hammock effect where people are going to relax and say, okay, great, I can just live off the people's dollar and not need to worry about it.
Pardini?
Yeah,
But I
I
could be
mean,
wrong.
I would say it's a good way of putting it, but I think it's more just like this complacency and comfortable numbness, especially with basic income. You're just going to get a check that you can do whatever you wanted with. There's no way they could cut you off if you don't conform to pro-social behavior, which is very hard to verify. Conventional welfare programs tend not to work, and there's a lot of fraud and inefficiencies involved with those. The main real issue is the difference in economic growth rates in countries that have embraced these types of social welfare states to those who are lighter on them. Examples would be the US and East Asian countries on one end versus the European countries and Australia and Canada on the other end. Like, if your society has really no incentive to change or reform or adapt, and the market pressures is usually a good job of doing that, it stagnates and eventually dies.
That's like under our current system, right? That's not taking into consideration the whole AI, like, you know,
Yes.
assembly line production being taken over by robots. So like, I want to ask Nick, you know, to reframe what you're talking about, that UBI or a similar system wouldn't be functional for the economy where all the workers are displaced because their job has been taken over.
Is that rebuttal from Pardini, real quick?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I don't think all of the jobs are going to be displaced.
But
I think
like
there
a
are
good-
other
a
ways
good
that
portion.
people can their lives in a post-AI world. AI gives you infinite operating leverage. So if you are creative and you have an idea, you can build what previously took 100 employees with a single family operating it with the combination of robots and AI.
All right, next question, Fatih.
So, topic is like expanding to somewhere else. I have my view, but I would like to hear your decision on that. So many economists think about it. There is no much difference between like corporate incentives and like corporate subsidies or tax incentives and UBI, right? So what makes the difference, or economically common sense or legitimate, in your view, especially, giving just money to individuals? So what's the difference between giving money to individuals or the corporate entities?
The main difference is that in an economics perspective, an individual has a higher marginal propensity to consume, particularly a lower income individual, than a business or a higher income individual. If you give the business that incentive, they're going to save the money or invest it in CapEx that will lead to future economic growth and more capital in the economy. Whereas if you give it to a person, they're going to spend it, whether it's to pay their rent, whether it's to buy food, whether it's to go out with their friends. And the latter tends to be more inflationary than the other because the money is going more into circulation directly into the economy.
We bail out banks, we bail out corporations. I think it's perfectly fine to say that it would be a good idea to help bail out individuals who are struggling and can't afford to eat, can't afford to find housing. So I appreciate the support. I think it would be a great idea to help, and maybe not $2,000 a month, but like what Alaska has pointed out, it's about $1,000, $2,000 a year. But now we're just haggling over price, where the basic concept has been proven to work, that they're not stagnant in their economy, the people aren't lazy. A lot of people think of it as beer money, but however they spend it, that's up to them, that's their freedom.
It doesn't result in any beneficial policy outcome. It doesn't serve the role of the social safety net that they're intending.
Know where the money comes from though, right?
Yeah, it comes from oil revenue.
Okay, great. So the money that they get in Alaska, is based on the oil revenue for the state, where it's a royalty, right? So if we were to add this system to Amazon, to Tesla, if we were to give a royalty to citizens for companies that exist in America and were to benefit the citizens who live here,
The math doesn't math.
Next question here. For you, this is a theoretical concept. We actually did have a relatively high-profile experiment with UBI. In 2020, we had like $1,200 a month that went out to everybody, and we also had the unemployment. So it ended up being a de facto UBI for a lot of people.
Yeah, I was going to get into that.
Can each of you talk about what the impact of those were and whether that was a good thing or a bad thing for the broader economy in the short and long term?
Okay.
so we all got free money from the government in 2020. Everyone got a free check.
Not everyone.
Can we say that? A large number of people in the country got free money from the government. You might not remember that, but the point of it is that you are not subsistent on the government when the government helps you, right? You are still self-serving, you are still helping yourself, you are still trying to find your own footing in life. If your career is being uprooted by an AI robot through no fault of your own, it makes sense to help people bridge the gap between where they are and where they need to be with their new career choices.
Okay, so there were two types of checks. There were like the general stimulus, which were like one-time things. And then the extended unemployment benefits, where you replaced somebody's salary up to about $50,000 a year, depending on what state you lived in, for over a year in some places, particularly in blue states like California. The result ended up being less people working and producing things, because why show up to a job, especially in manufacturing, which is physically hard, if you can just sit at home and collect the money. Then you have the same amount of money to spend on goods and services. So you had more money to spend and less stuff being made. The result was inflation. And I think ultimately, if you had UBI, the price level would just rise proportionally with the UBI level, so that basically we're back at square one. And that's exactly what happened.
My main concern is that if we get to a point in our economy where more than 50% of the jobs are being replaced, where is the money going to come from to afford whatever they're producing? If you have a good and a service, you need someone to buy it. If they don't have any money because their job has been taken, that's not going to be a good business
The
model.
result would be lower. Prices would have to go down until people can afford it. That's how a market works.
How can we find a middle ground UBI solution that's temporary and effective?
I don't think UBI really is the solution at all, honestly. I don't think there is a middle ground for UBI. I think there's a few solutions. One you can reform the education system, particularly the high school level education system. We have the worst of any developed country for grades 6 through 12. And the second thing is that what we need to do is we need to structure our labor market so that wages go up, not down. And by that, you do that is by limiting the labor supply while keeping demand constant. And there's a bunch of macroprudential policies that could do that, but that's a whole nother conversation.
To answer your question about where can we find compromise, I'm more than happy to compromise. I think that we need to talk about this. This discussion we're having is really productive because it's the one that we're going to need to have. It's not hypothetical, it's happening, right? It's out there. Whether or not we agree right now is not the point. I'd be more than happy to. I think the main issue here is that UBI is going to be a system we need to consider. If the moving pieces look different down the road when we have the finalized version, that's fine, but we need to start talking about what the final version is going to look like.
Is it the inflation causing so much trouble in our economy right now, or is it AI? Our economy is not producing enough for everyone at the same skills and development and all this training achieved in the past decade. Is it related to mismatch, policy implementation, or the conclusion of technological development right now? If we can frame out the problem first, we can base our discussions on top of it.
What's your question?
The question is, how do you define universal basic income, and what's the economical background to support or oppose that idea?
Who wants to know how much?
I'll
Which
go
one wants to
first.
go first?
The fundamental problem with the economy is that the marginal cost of living is higher than the marginal wage for the median worker. And that is due to a variety of structural issues, or it's a combination of a weak education system that makes people less productive of the previous generations, or maybe the impact of technology such as social media making people less productive than in previous generations. It's also the product of a government that constantly spends above its needs, and so it has to inflate the currency, and that has adverse effects, particularly on the housing market, and a regulational framework that keeps prices structurally high to protect certain interests in our society. And then you have the technology factor, which is increasing the minimum cognitive ability and skills that you need to be a functioning, productive member of society.
Patricola?
Right, so I agree with Nick that it'd be great to go back to some of the issues that are combining with unemployment, with AI and all of that, like for education. It would be great to restructure that. I had a good conversation with someone in the audience about that just before we got up here, that I think there are tons of ways to streamline education so that you don't have to learn the quadratic formula that's completely useless to the majority of people, but it's extremely helpful if you need it. I think that if we are going to have a discussion about what it's going to do to the workforce in terms of productivity, in terms of how much people are making an effort. I think that's really strange because we have, 60-hour work week. It used to be lower, and we used to have an abundance of things in the country that were cheaper to afford. So I don't know how we're going to...
The average work week is 34 hours, not 60.
34, fine. My point is that adding more hours to the work week is not going to be the solution for the majority of people who are going to have their jobs replaced by an AI system or automation. The people who are benefiting from automation are going to be sitting high. They're going to be very excited that they're kings of the world. What I want is for everyone to enjoy living in that society of abundance, in a utopian system where people can mass produce whatever they need, food, water, housing, you name it. But if we can't get to a point where everyone can afford this beautiful world, then it's a kingdom for fools.
Okay.